right, I think we are about to start. All right, so the meeting is back in session. At this point in time, we will recognize the city clerk as we move on to item F, if the clerk would read.
F is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout authorizing and adopting the 2020 to 2029 capital improvement plan and the 2020 to 2022 capital improvement budget and approving the project budgets attached.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Given where we're at right now in this process of the meeting at 9:05, I'm going to look at abbreviating what we would do on the CIP. Given that we've deferred the action on City Hall, we would look to defer action on the capital improvement decision. But, however, I do have a couple people that are prepared to make a couple of presentations. We could go ahead and do those and then take any questions you may have regarding those items and/or take questions over the next week that you may have regarding the CIP. So if there are any questions of me, otherwise I'll introduce the first person.
All right.
Okay. I'd like to introduce our Deputy Director of Utilities, Braxton Copley, to come forward and talk about the WEIR. There was information that was provided to you regarding the WEIR project, and he'll run through the presentation.
Good evening. The city manager asked me to do a presentation on the Kansas River WEIR benching project. It's getting late. You've received a memo from me. You've received a memo from our design consultant. I believe that there are some questions that are out there, and so I wanted to take a couple of minutes and just kind of go through and hopefully provide you with some good information in terms of where we've been and where we are and what our recommendation is and the reasons why. The starting point of this is in 1985 when the WEIR was constructed in the Kansas River to provide us a constant pool of water for our intakes. In 2007 and 2011, there were deaths, unfortunately, caused by the keeper hydraulic on the Kansas WEIR. Basically, a keeper hydraulic is as the water is spilling over the WEIR, the water is basically tumbling over, and anything that's caught in that hydraulic is going to stay there unless it's kicked free of that. So we've the city issued in 2012 an RFP, and that went out across the country. One consultant responded, and that was Recreation Engineering and Planning. They're out of Colorado. They are nationally recognized for dam recreation and safety projects. In 2013, they did a preliminary study, and then in 2015, they were engaged to actually come up with the design of a project. This is the project that they came up with. We call it Option 1. You can see that the entire improvements of the WEIR, including the nesting ponds at the north bank, as well as the rock benching on the downstream side of the WEIR, as well as the chute, are all located within the banks of the Kansas River. The consultant came up with a construction cost estimate of $1.9 million. We put that out for bid, and the lowest bid was $4.45 million. They basically missed the mark by about $2.5 million. We asked them to do three things after that came in. The first was to take another hard look at the construction costs to see if perhaps they missed something, as well as we asked them to look at were there any opportunities for value engineering in the project, and third, we asked them were there any other alternative designs that could potentially be done for a lower cost. So you can see if we take option 1 of the $4.4 million roughly, and you gross that up for contingency and finance, you deduct out the authorized funding from the previous capital improvement budgets that have been approved, that left additional funding needed of $2.8 million. The consultant came back that they thought that there was another viable option, what we call option 2, and this option would include the excavation of a channel along the north bank, and you would have your nesting ponds to allow for the safe passage of boats in this channel, as well as the fish ladder would be located in that, as well as, of course, rock benching to reduce the hydraulic, as well as a grouted rock dissipation structure at the low notch in the weir. And based on the 60% plans they came back with, they said, okay, we can do that for $3.9 million. And so we were excited. We went from 4.5 million down to 3.9, thought that was a great idea. We actually included that in our initial proposal for the CIP. And then as they further developed the design for this, they came back to us a couple of weeks ago and said, well, actually, it's going to be right at $5 million to be able to construct this. And that was the memo that we provided you through the city manager a couple of weeks ago, which explained their reasoning for that. And so if we take the $4.9 million, gross it up for contingency and financing, subtract out what we need, it's $3.5 million, which is basically $700,000 more than option 1. And so I've been asked what happened. Why did they initially tell you it was going to be $3 million or $4 million, and then they came back and said, no, it's actually $5 million, sorry. Well, the starting point is the consultant pointed out that they were going on 60% drawings. And then when I drilled into their initial preliminary budget or their construction estimate, and then drilled into their more refined estimate, the biggest increase was $800,000 for the temporary river diversion and dewatering. They had $300,000 in their preliminary budget based on their prelim plans, and then they increased that by $800,000 to $1.1 million for river diversion and dewatering. Additionally, they bumped up the mobilization by $50,000, and then they also increased their sheet pile for the wall by $76,000. So that's basically about $920,000. The rest of it are small items, but this is the biggest explanation for the $1 million increase between what they initially gave us on their preliminary construction estimate based on the 60% design versus the more refined costs. So we have put into the CIP the amount for the for the higher amount that would basically fund option 2. Why would I recommend option 2 as opposed to option 1 if it's $700,000 more? Well, first, there's an ease of constructability to be able to do a significant amount of the work on the north bank to be able to do the excavation to create the chute or the bypass. It reduces the risk to the contractor of losing portions of the work while they're doing it, because when they're doing the dry bank work, cutting that excavation, laying the stonework in to create the nesting pools, they can leave the river bank still intact so that you're not risking when a high river event coming in, other than like a 100-year flood event, the contractor is not as a great of risk for losing that work. Obviously, they would still need to do work in the wet channel down at the low water notch to be able to provide safe, whether it's a chute or whether it's grouted dissipation blocks down there. That's going to require dewatering. The majority, as I've mentioned before, majority of the bypass can be constructed from the bank. It reduces the amount of temporary dam work because you could just do temporary dam for your tie-in work for the chute on the up and downstream sides, but then of course you still have to do the temporary dam and dewatering to be able to protect the low water notch. There is another significant benefit is the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks will not allow any construction work in the Kansas River from March 1st until August 31st because we have to protect native fish species in the Kansas River, most notably several species of chub. The excavation work by creating the chute would allow the contractor to do that dry bank work during that chub spawn season. So it basically opens up a much more significant part of the construction season for that work. And then finally, there is a safety enhancement because by doing the chute, it allows for boaters, rafters to egress to either side of the bank as opposed to being in the Kansas River channel where you basically have sheet pile and a temporary rock wall that you might have to be hanging off of. So those are the, basically it's just a quick overview and explanation of what the project is, where we are, where we've been, and I will gladly stand for any questions that you may have on this. As a closing point, I will just point out that the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks has agreed contractually to provide a $500,000 grant, and that's up to $500,000. That's based on participating costs. However, the significant condition of that grant is that all construction work be done, final invoices be turned in by October 1st of 2020. We have asked whether there would be a possibility of extending that, and we have not been given a definitive answer. They have said only that that may be a possibility.
Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate that presentation. I have several questions. Option 2 looks like it would be easily destroyed when the river floods, which would require ongoing routine maintenance. How would you prevent that from happening? Is it concrete? I mean, what's going to prevent that from just being washed away?
That's an excellent question, thank you, and certainly whether it's option 1 or option 2, this design consultant has come up with a design that they think is both safe, as you're inviting people to get into this area that is perilous, as evidenced by the deaths, as well as to be constructed in a fashion that will allow for those improvements to still be there even after we have a significant high water event. And I've been down to the intakes when we've had 100,000 cubic feet per second coursing down that river, and you see trees 36-inch diameter basically being thrown around like toothpicks. And those improvements that they have also have significant amount of grouted rock in that, even in the chute where the nesting pools are, and then there are concrete ramps leading from pool to pool to pool. So certainly they have taken that into consideration, and they've certainly studied the hydrology of the Kansas River in terms of coming up with improvements. When I push them to say, can you value engineer this? Can you reduce the amount of rock? Can you? And the response is, no, we have basically reduced it to the extent that we can so that those improvements are still there even after a significant high water event.
Okay. And then does this solve the danger on the entire weir or just create bypass mechanisms to get around it?
Well, I would say that it certainly, in either option, it provides safety enhancements along the entire length of it.
So if somebody falls over the middle of it, there's a much less risk of peril than there is.
Yes, the consultant threw out a value engineering option, which was a $700,000 reduction in the cost of the project, but they were contemplating to remove the riprap, the 2-ton riprap benching, which we would wet set on a 400-foot section of that weir. To me, that is not a prudent thing to do when you're inviting people to get on the river and start going over this weir, to leave a large section of it unprotected. because then you're just increasing the chances of someone getting caught in that hydraulic, and you're not doing anything to dissipate that hydraulic.
Agreed. And my last question, if you don't mind, has this been run by the Riverfront Authority group that's meeting, and does it meet the master plan for the river?
I will defer to the deputy city manager, who I believe participates, or the city manager, I'm sorry, who also participates in those meetings.
Right. It is a project that they support. It's the purpose that they want to see for the riverfront, that they want to see this particular type of facility installed in order for them to have better access, and it provides them, those that are looking at doing commercial operations with floats, much safer location where they can start being much more proactive at taking more novice individuals down the river and feeling they have an opportunity to be able to do so safely.
Excellent. Last question. Have we discussed contracting with the turnpike folks to put K-tags on boats and monetize the rapids on the side? That's a joke, people.
Too late for that. Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Copley, thanks for bringing this here tonight. I heard something new. I met with you guys a couple weeks ago and saw a couple of these drawings, but I heard something new tonight that I hadn't heard before. Did you say you'll be able to access both banks now? Is that correct?
No, I said on the construction of the bypass chute offers a safety enhancement, because someone going down in a river or in a raft or a boat would be able to exit that channel either side, because you basically have riverbank on either side, as opposed to the option one design, and I can click back to that. Option one, all of the improvements are in the Kansas River, and then what you have is basically sheet pile and grouted rock that is providing the buffer between the Kansas River, the channel, and the chute that they had in the stream.
Okay. I just want to make certain I heard that, because I know in talking to, some of your people, there's a concern, one of the concerns is you don't really want people up in your water plant getting access to the water plant. And, I just wanted to make certain that was what I was hearing. People will not be able to get up the bank by the water plant. Well, I guess you could if you pull a canoe in there, but.
No, and you're absolutely right. While I do think it's important to have a safety enhancement at the low water notch, I would prefer to have the recreational use be on the north bank, because at these two intakes, the east and west intake, we have pumps that are a very high volume, low pressure pump that on average take between 15 million and 35 million gallons of water out of that river in a 24-hour period. Having a large contingent of people in boats, it's just a matter of time before someone would fall out of that and then be trapped by that strong suction into those intakes and be trapped against the grates that we have to protect from debris.
And does this plan speak to that in any ways? Is it protected in any way, other than just, people know they need to get over that direction?
No, neither one has any safety improvements along those intakes. The safety is designed and limited as part of this project for reducing that hydraulic on the weir.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Braxton, me and you been around a long time. Well, you left and came back, but we've been around a long time. I'm still here, but couple things. And this conversation has been around for a long time. Is there any private monies? I know at one point we stopped the project because we wanted the Corps of Engineers to come out and do their thing, and it's my understanding they've done that, right?
Yes, the initial option one was put through the Corps of Engineers for their approval, because any work in the river channel has to be approved by them. And then the other significant work that we're doing right now is the levee improvements, which is partially funded by the Corps. And obviously those improvements are still going on. The contractor has until end of 2020 to be able to finish those, the flood wall improvements as well as some improvements along the waterworks levee unit and a little bit more work on undersea pitch berm on the South Topeka levee unit.
And then it was put on hold, or this conversation was kind of put on hold because of the funding, I remember that. And we talked about getting private funding. I don't know if this is even a question for you, but somebody, I don't know if they have any answers about that.
Councilwoman, at this point, we do not have any private funding that would go to this project. It would be funded by the city of Topeka from various sources. We have utility money, general obligation bond money, and then we have the grant. Those are the three funding sources that we would have.
So what happened to, there was another pool of money, it was, and I don't understand, I think it was state money then.
$500,000 from the state.
Yeah, we have the 500,000 from the state, but not any additional money. And also, I think the Corps of Engineer was pursued, but they would not put funding into this project based on it as not a flood control type project. So therefore, they wouldn't put funding towards this project.
I could have swore there was another pot of money there.
I'm not aware of that, ma'am, sorry.
Do you know, Braxton, do you remember?
No, the $2.2 million existing is, as Brent had indicated, three different funding sources. There was a little bit of utility money, there was some general fund money, and then there was, of course, the grant. And my recollection is that initially they went to Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, got a portion of the 500,000, I want to say around 300,000, went back to them. Wildlife and Parks was able to obtain additional funding, particularly because of the, you got both the recreational aspect as well as the preservation of the native species, and it was able to get that bumped up to the $500,000 amount currently.
Thank you, Braxton. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilwoman Hiller.
I think what you're remembering is that originally they were counting on a grant that, if I recall correctly, was from the Coast Guard. And it got all the way down to the wire and we were ready to go. And then it turned out that I'm not sure the guidelines had changed, but whoever was reading the guidelines had changed, and they said that the city wasn't eligible to be a grantee. And the state stepped in, and I usually go to those riverfront meetings and worked out some kind of a swap out so that the state could the fish ladder money was, they had to work out another arrangement to funnel the money, but I think that's probably what you're remembering.
Seeing no further questions, thank you for your presentation. Councilwoman Hiller.
Is the number then correct? Here, I still have an old one that doesn't have the connector numbers on it. So is with these changes that are just a couple weeks old, is this $2,350,000 still the number, or has it changed?
No, the additional funding needed on this slide that only I can see. 3.5 million would be the total additional funding needed for the option 2.
So this line item has changed in our proposed CIP?
Yes, new numbers were put into the form so that it changes the number for the weir.
Okay, I suppose,
Yes,
once
and
I
it was
copy
included
it
in
and
the-
start working it, I don't switch
Right.
it out unless I
Okay.
realize it's different.
Yes, so the book that was established, that's published in this agenda, has a number, it's the last item on the first column under 2020, where retrofit shoot additional money is $3,541,000.
So I was supposed to change out all my budget numbers before today?
You were given the new book that has those changes.
Look at the print agenda. The print agenda.
Oh, well, I don't print it, so I just had my book. I thought I had the right budget. Good thing we're not voting tonight. Thank you.
It changes the city hall number and the weir number. I think those are the only two changes, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. Braxton, just out of curiosity, I mean, I know that there's a reason we have this weir, right? Councilman Emerson helped me out on answering some questions on this. But out of curiosity, how much would it cost if it didn't exist today and we had to put one in, starting from scratch? You know, I mean, if we dynamited that thing out of there and put in a brand-new one, you know, how much, is this the design that we would use, and would it be a comparable cost?
I do not have a number for you off the top of my head to replace the weir. It is a significant concrete structure that basically extends across the entire reach of the Kansas River. I will tell you that if we were building a brand-new weir from scratch, that my recommendation would be that we would add features to reduce the keeper hydraulic, knowing what we know now, as opposed to back in 1985 when that was constructed.
Okay.
Now, as you know, this project has obviously morphed. It started out first as just a safety project, and then it has taken on additional elements, the recreational use of the river to allow for safe passage of boats, canoes, as well as the fish ladder to allow for the passage of the native species.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Jensen.
We do actually need the weir for the water system to work properly, correct?
Yes, the purpose for the construction of the weir was to establish a permanent pool, even in the lowest flows on the Kansas River, so that we would always have the ability to pull from our intakes. And again, particularly during the summer when we have those low flows, we also have our highest demand.
Sure.
And like last summer, 37 million was our peak day. So we definitely need to have that water, that pool to be able to pull from, to be able to reliably provide water to our citizens.
Excellent. And one quick follow-up. I'm assuming we bonded that in '85. 30 years would have been passed if we paid this thing off.
That would be a great question for the finance department, because it would just be an assumption on my part whether we use 20-year bonds or 30-year bonds, but I would assume that it's been paid off.
I was 3 when we built this thing, so I would hope we paid it off.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. If Deputy Director of Finance, Nick Hawkins, could please come forward. And he has some comments regarding amendments, and then I have just a couple more comments after that.
No, we're deferring it. That's what he announced it at first.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. The current proposed CIP reflects staff's recommended plan for addressing infrastructure and capital needs over the next 10 years. Certainly appreciative of your comments and questions throughout the process. As a note, the CIP that you have in front of you that was attached to this agenda does include the 2 changes that were talked about tonight. So the weir retrofit shoot increased to the $3.54 million, as well as the reduction in the City Hall base phase amendments of about $800,000. So those 2 changes are the only 2 changes that are in the book, and the project sheets that are included with that have been updated to reflect those changes. As I said, certainly appreciative of your questions and open to any other potential questions that you have, as it looks like we'll continue this process to the 16th. You've also been sent out, I believe, last week, a copy of potential amendments that have been proposed by city council members throughout the process. And throughout the last couple of weeks, staff has also provided responses to those amendments as what the impact would be on the plan as it is right now, what that change would mean to our overall capital improvement plan. So again, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. There's been a lot of information sent out over the last several weeks. This is a process that was started from the staff side years ago. But from a public standpoint, we had our first conversation on February 5th talking about a financial overview, then had a presentation of the projects on February 9th, and throughout February and March, we've had several conversations on the CIP, and would happy to answer any further questions that you have.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Hawkins, thanks for being here, and thanks for all your the answers you've provided over the last, I guess, the last month or so. Two questions. The first is, we've talked a lot about, 13 million versus 9 million on the borrowing, the borrowing cap. My question there is, what is the 13 million? Is it only needed if certain projects go forward, or is that needed regardless?
So what is actually in the plan, if you average it out over the first 3 years, which is what you would be approving with the resolution, the CIB part of the resolution, averages about 11.3 million per year. So it's right about in the middle of that. And again, that reflects staff's best recommendations with the resources that we have. When talking about the 13 million, that was just kind of to show, the potential that we have. And even if you look at what we're retiring each year in terms of principal, we actually probably have more flexibility than that within the current debt service fund that pays for that principal and interest.
So
that-
even, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
So even if the WEIR doesn't get, even assuming that's not in there or City Hall's not in there, we still need to do more than 9 million, is that correct? And if you want to figure it out and send me an email tomorrow, that's fine. I'm trying to figure out what the need is, if it's.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilman Emerson, I would say that the numbers would change as far as what we'd end up averaging out. I mean, we raised the cap when I made my budget proposal. We raised the cap amount by looking at the projects that we felt were needed. So the number would change. I mean, probably the biggest thing that, impacted that are we're looking at the 2.3 million per year for facilities improvements. That's new. So we're factoring that in, and then we look at the special projects such as the WEIR and City Hall. That really bumps up this first year. And then the 2.3 affects the next 2 years. And so for us, that's why the number, I'm requesting the increase in that cap from the standpoint of that we have projects that we feel need to be completed. And that's the reason we're looking at it. And we have done the math and looked at it, and that we can afford to do that with the capacity that we have in the debt service levy as we still continue to pay off bonds. And so the numbers would change if neither of those projects were approved or one was approved. The numbers would change as to what the average would roll out to be for that 3 years. Because we're asking for that increase because we feel there's a need to do those projects. So changing what would be actually authorized would change those numbers.
Okay, thank you. And the second question, if I can, Mayor, with reference to the WEIR project in particular, I saw Mr. Copley had said we have to be done to get the matching grant, 500,000, has to be done and invoiced by, I think, October of 2020. But yet the increase in here is for 2020, so wouldn't we actually need to amend the project 2019?
For us, since we already have the authorization of the earlier 2.2, we can go ahead and move forward with the project. And it'll end up spanning over 2 years as we go forward with the project. Once we get final approval and begin the work now, it'll go into 2020. So we'll have the authorization, you temp note, and go ahead and move forward with the project. And so we would be able to get it completed in time, just go to finish, and we would have that financing that we need based on the authorization that you provide us once you
Okay.
approve the budget.
Great, thank you.
Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry to do this again, but on this project, it seems like a lot of money. I want this to happen, but the cost is just astronomical. And, when we look at originally a $500,000 matching grant on a $2.25 million project, it's 8.5% of the initial project cost. Or, I'm sorry, it's 22%. But with this $5.8 million, now it's 8.5%. I mean, the impact of $500,000 is not as much when we're more than doubling the cost of the project. Are we 100% sure that there's not a better way to do this?
My answer is that we put out an RFP in order to hire someone to do this. We received this from a reputable engineer relative to his ability to do this. He was hired and has created a design. Unfortunately, I'm not an engineer, and I have to go by his recommendation. This is what he's provided us. And so we would have, I mean, I don't know that there's another person that can do it. Specifically, we would be looking at having them go through and analyze the design, and we'd be getting a second opinion. Whether or not I have anybody that can do that, I don't know. I mean, we had only one person apply when we put out a request for an RFP last time. So we would have to do some digging to be able to find someone to be able to do that. So I guess that's the long answer to the question. I agree. I understand that it's a very large cost to a project, and it has mushroomed into a big thing rather than what looked like a reasonable project to do when it started. But I have to take the design estimate that I'm given, and then eventually we have to analyze if it's a project worth doing or not. I understand that.
So if I may, so I'm not as familiar with government procurement as maybe the next guy, but is there not any way that we can, rather than, I mean, if you issue an RFP, nothing comes back even close to the budget cost, is there not a way to circumvent the RFP process and actively seek out a design build contractor or something like that?
I have to ask staff that was here earlier than me, but when they did the RFPs and sought a person to do this design, I know there was trouble finding someone. And I would have to ask someone else from staff to go talk about the process they used in order to do that. I don't know if anybody can shed light on that for me, please.
Mayor and Councilman Mays, I wasn't here when the initial RFP went out either, but we could certainly ask for folks to come in and, as you say, do a design build. At this point, I think what we would run into is a timing issue, though. If the grant's important to us, and if we need that fish ladder, then I think, we're running up against the back end of when that has to be spent. So I think it could become a timing issue, but this could certainly be a candidate for a design build project.
Councilman Jensen and Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm struggling desperately to hold back my terrible puns here.
Please do.
Is the fish ladder ADA compliant? I mean, ladders are... My question in all seriousness is for Ms. Robertson. Now that there is an established precedent that the weir we have, that I assume we own, is dangerous, does not doing something about it put the city at risk because we know that it's inadequately designed and that sort of thing?
Councilmember Jensen, it will all be on a case-by-case basis. It just
Sure.
depends on the facts and circumstances that exist, the particular set of circumstances. I think for right now, we're going to be okay. It's obviously much better if we can get this done. But we have signage, we have all kinds of things in place that people know that there's a danger there.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Along the lines of those discussions, there were some questions when the first RFP went out. I was sitting in on the Riverfront meeting. Apparently, the contractors that bid on it, as you can imagine, weren't used to doing river projects. We don't do them around here. And there had not been any outreach to the contractor, for instance, that was at Bowersock that was well-known and experienced. I mean, we learned that sitting around the room. I think perhaps they've been in touch with that more experienced, more river experienced contractor at this point. I wondered, though, there was some discussion anyway that perhaps that the bids were almost double what the budget was at first because of the uncertainty of working in a river, and certainly, and some of the elements of the work that had been spec'd out in that particular RFP before. And I see that this issue that Councilman Emerson had brought up about requiring a dry hole is back. There had been some discussion about whether that was really necessary. It certainly was costly. But also, overall, that perhaps the bids had more or less doubled because we had offered that they could stretch it over 2 seasons, but when you think about all the equipment that's required and all the expense and risk of getting it in and out and getting your project in and out, that might not have helped really, even though it was well intended. So I've been just kind of listening and watching steadily, but Gary Lacy himself thinks that the project would cost this much, or is his or is his estimate in part based on what the bids were before? Do we know?
From what I've been told, they took into account the costs that were quoted to them in the one bid that was submitted. So using that as a baseline relative to the decision. Obviously, if we found a qualified contractor, there's always the opportunity that it would be coming in less because they would look at the project as being something that could be done for less based on their expertise.
Right, that's what I'm thinking, and I don't know if anybody has reached out to people that do that a lot. That might be, I mean, people like to hire local, I get that, but if maybe the specialties similar to hiring Mr. Lacy would get us people who are much more confident about getting in and out of the river, it might be worth it, and or structuring it, not that we wouldn't have to budget it, but so that there was a contingency available if there were weather or something like that, but otherwise we wouldn't need to pay out quite as much. Just some thoughts based on holding up the wall with everybody else during all those meetings.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation.
At this point, based on where we're at with the meeting, and we know that we're going to continue the discussion relative to the City Hall project, obviously, we need to defer this item, but I'd already made preparations for these presentations. So, but at this point, I think it would make sense that if you had additional questions relative to the budget, if you hadn't had a chance to do that, you could submit them to us, and we would consider them and get an answer, take them and get an answer back to you. But otherwise, I think it would be reasonable to go ahead and defer action on this until the next meeting at least, if not the 16th.
So is the body okay with moving forward with deferring item G as well, because it's the bonding? Okay. Well, at this point, we move on to item 7, which is the oh, we have to vote on it. So,
April,
no, yeah, we did. Yes, we did. We voted on the other one.
Call voting on deferring the call. It's an action item. I'll move to defer to
April 9th. Thank you so much.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by the deputy mayor. At this point in time, we will proceed with the voting for the deferral. Okay, so now we go to item G, and the city manager is also recommending deferral.
Yes.
So at this point in time, this is the item of the bonding, so we are asking for a deferral for the same deputy mayor.
Move to defer till April 9th.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I see no discussion. We proceed by voting. Everybody's got their hand on. Just like, hurry up.
Okay. Ms. Hiller? Okay, we have to vote again, I'm sorry. Yeah, I cleared the board, sorry. Okay, we have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. The next motion that we need to make is a motion to extend past 10. I have a motion by Councilman Jensen, a second by Councilman Emerson. Any questions on this item? Seeing none, Councilwoman Ortiz.
I won't support this, it's getting late.
Thank you for your comments. We now proceed by voting.
10 yes here.
We have 8 yes, Ms. Clear and Ms. Ortiz voting no.
8 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to non-action items. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to invite to the podium Ryan Murray. He's with ETC Institute. ETC Institute is the firm that ran our Topeka Citizen Satisfaction Survey. And he's going to make some general comments regarding the survey, and then I'll have a few comments additionally. Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you,
Thank you
Council.
for your patience.
Oh, thank you for extending for me. I appreciate it. It's a long drive home. And luckily, my item's been paid for. So we're in the clear here. So that's good news. But yeah, again, thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure to work with a local community. We pride ourselves in kind of all the local work that we do. We're all around the community, all the way, from western Kansas all the way to eastern Missouri. So we're really proud of what we do. And we're a national leader in market research. So when ETC Institute was hired to do this work for Topeka, everyone knew that you were hiring the gold standard of survey or market research firms. And we survey folks from all over the world, specifically the United States, but we've done work in Ethiopia and other countries as well. So the purpose of most of our surveys is to objectively assess the satisfaction the residents have with general city services, and that's what we did here by administering a survey to a random sample of respondents. The surveys help identify opportunities to improve overall satisfaction with city services, particularly those items that are of high priority, and I'll get into that kind of in the last couple slides. And then we measure trends over time. So the last time the survey was conducted was 2008. We measured trends from the 2019 survey to those results, and then we compare Topeka's performance to national benchmarks, and that's one of the things that we do really well since we do so much work nationwide. We do so much work that we're able to compare everybody's results. So we can compare your results to similarly sized communities, communities with similar amenities, communities that have zoos, communities that don't, things like that. So we do a really good job in all of that. Just briefly get into the methodology here. It's a 7-page survey randomly administered to a random sample of respondents selected from the city as a whole. Each survey took approximately 15 to 20 minutes to complete. If you were really thoughtful in your responses, it probably run a little over that. But you could safely do it in about 15 minutes. And it includes a lot of the same questions asked on previous surveys, specifically for those trends, that trends aspect, to see how the city's performing over time. Like I said earlier, is mailed to a random sample of respondents. We completed email and phone follow-ups as needed just to reach our goals. We had a goal of 400. We actually completed 438 surveys for a margin of error of about 5% or 4.7% at the 95% level of confidence. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me. I know that everybody's here late, so I was going to try to breeze through things here, but please stop me. This is a map of the location of survey respondents. We had a really good distribution throughout the entire city. Some of these pockets that you notice that are kind of blank are either, more industrial areas or areas where folks just don't live. So any kind of blank areas that you're seeing up here, I know that's kind of hard to see. Trust us, there were no houses in that area probably to survey. So we do a really good job of geolocating. Basically, we do geospatial analysis for almost every question that we can on the survey, and we provide an appendix of maps. And basically, that gives you kind of an idea of how different areas of the city are responding. So if generally folks are satisfied with something or generally dissatisfied is really where the maps help out, we can kind of pinpoint pocket areas, and that's typically helpful with like codes enforcement, maintenance of city streets, and those types of issues. The maps are really helpful. if we get into some of the just general findings here, residents are generally satisfied. I know that there was a lot of concern about some of the major priorities and some of the concerns in some of the earlier discussions, but generally folks are satisfied, and we say that because you're beating the national average by about 3%. Although not outweighing our margin of error, it is still a significant finding, and we find that to be something of note. Residents are more satisfied with utility services than they were in 2008. So there are a lot of upwards and downwards trends, but overall folks are more satisfied now than they were about 10 years ago. And then our top priorities maintained from 2008, kind of the same items here. There's about 5 of them. Maintenance of city streets is something we get in just about every city the size of Topeka. Flow of traffic congestion management in the city, another large item that is kind of one of those things that everybody's constantly battling. You fix a street in one area, you cause backups in another. So it's just this battle that cities are constantly fighting. The enforcement of city codes and ordinances, one of those items that affects both small and large communities. Likely, if you've had a run-in with code enforcement, it's not a good item. If you call and your neighbor's yard gets mowed, you have a positive perception of code enforcement, but most of the time, folks are running into code enforcement, it's likely they're in violation. So folks just don't typically have a positive perception of code enforcement. Quality of city services, such as water and sewer utilities, was also a top priority. Although more satisfaction in that area, it became a higher priority based on the importance of those items. And then the quality of police services. In a city this size, that's very common. Police services are always one of those things that folks are satisfied with, and we'll see that in the results. But it's also one of those things that always tops the importance list. So folks want to make sure that city leaders are aware that it's very important to them to maintain those services. This is kind of our overall question. This is the question the ETC Institute will use to kind of just gauge the pulse of the community. How healthy is the community and how well is the community being led currently? And we see here that most of the items on the scale received either blue, which is always going to be a positive rating on these charts, or a yellow. They're typically yellow. These are white. White are neutral responses, which means that respondents just didn't have quite enough information to make a valid response. There are large portions of red in most of these results. However, as a place to retire, overall image of the city, overall appearance of the city, and how well the city is managing growth, those are items that can be easily fixed. They're perception issues, and this is a perception survey, and this is particularly a perceptions question. So, fixing those perceptions can be an easy fix. It's an inexpensive fix usually, and it usually, in our experience, is rooted in communication and making sure that communication between the community and city leaders is strong. Value received for your city tax dollars and fees, most often than not, if we see high dissatisfaction levels on one of these kind of pulse questions, it's that item. So. Yeah, please.
Yes, Councilman Emerson.
And I won't do this much because I know we all want to get out of here, but one thing that strikes me here is quality of transportation facilities for vehicles, and it's mostly either neutral or positive.
Yeah.
What is that item? Because I'm thinking streets, but yet that's our biggest complaint as well.
Yeah, so in this question, it's likely more directed towards streets. We actually ask a specific streets question in a different slide, but this is just a perceptions question, so we get into kind of those bigger cloud items that we're asking. And this is meant for the respondent to kind of take what it means for them and run with it. Also, the individual, Kelly, that I worked with to help develop the survey, she probably has a pretty good idea of what this particular question means to staff and what this item particularly means. I may not have that specific information. But here's the item that you were just mentioning. Overall maintenance of city streets is down there at the bottom. About 1 in 5 respondents are satisfied with the maintenance of city streets, but a vast majority of respondents, 68, are dissatisfied. And these red arrows over to the left are just those services that receive the lowest ratings. That are also, well, the bottom 3 received the lowest ratings. The 5 services that are listed with red arrows are those items that were high priorities based on our important satisfaction analysis. And that's quality of police services, quality of city water, sewer utilities, and I went through the rest just a moment ago. But we found that quality of fire, emergency, and medical services, 87% of folks are satisfied with that. And like I said earlier, a vast majority of people are satisfied with police services. They just want the city to know that it's a really important item to them. One thing to note that is really important here is that the overall quality of customer service received is very great. It's tough to it's tough to get good ratings in that category because folks are oftentimes, and this is the same as code enforcement, you're calling to have a problem resolved. And if the city just is not in the position to resolve your particular problem, policy issues or just budgetary constraints or whatever it might be, not everybody's call can be resolved to satisfaction. So to receive a mark this high, varying on 60%, 6 out of 10 folks are satisfied when they call or have contact with the city. It's very impressive. These are some of the notable increases since 2008. There were quite a few. We're not saying these are significant because sometimes the percentage difference change from 2008 to 2018 or 19 wasn't quite reaching our significant, but these all saw an increase of 5% or more. So the effectiveness of leadership provided by city's elected officials, congratulations, since 2008 in the last 10 years or so, that has improved. Maintenance and preservation of downtown, again, customer service from city employees, and then a lot to do with the zoo. And something that we find very difficult for larger cities to overcome is how well the city's planning growth or development opportunities, and that was actually a notable increase, which is quite impressive. Notable decreases, there were a few items, and again, towards development, the experience in obtaining land development info and approval, and as Topeka grows, you're going to have that dissatisfaction with those types of items. Fire-related education programs offered by the city, likely a lack of knowledge, likely a more centralist. It's not going to dissatisfaction, it's going to neutral, which is just taking away from our satisfaction ratings. It's not that folks are dissatisfied with those. The overall quality of city water and sewer utilities, again, more satisfied overall with utilities. However, this did go slightly down, and then overall quality of police protection saw a slight decline as well. Our important satisfaction analysis is kind of the thing that will give you an idea of those priority measures to hit. And what the basis of it is that public agencies are going to improve overall satisfaction by hitting on those areas, those particular city services that received lower levels of satisfaction, so under median levels of satisfaction, but were higher on the importance scale. So we asked satisfaction. I showed you that chart just a moment ago. We also asked importance. When we found out that 82% of folks were indicating that the city maintenance of city streets is one of the most important items for the city to emphasize over the next couple of years, we're obviously going to see that hit the top of our priority investments. Quality of police services, again, 40% of folks indicated that's one of their top 3 choices, and then overall flow of traffic and congestion management, which leads me to this chart, which basically shows us and breaks these items down into 3 categories. Medium, meaning those items are likely not going to have a great impact on overall satisfaction, even if we improve satisfaction in those items, which would be really difficult in some of these. Those high priority items, increasing satisfaction in those items, will likely bring them into the medium priority column, and it could actually improve overall satisfaction with the city. However, these high priority items, these items that ranked 0.2 or above, and as we see here, overall maintenance of city streets received almost a 0.7 on our scale. Those are the items that are really going to improve overall perceptions and overall satisfaction with the city as a whole if we're able to increase satisfaction. This was the second and the third lowest level of satisfaction for both those items, and they were the first and third most important items as well. We ran this analysis for a couple of different questions on the survey, but this one's kind of the most pertinent to city leaders. And again, there's in the report, there's a whole breakdown of the methodology of this and further tables that kind of go into the details of all this. But with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions?
No? Yeah, great.
So thank you so much.
Yes.
I think if you were sitting here on the crowd, so you were hearing our concerns about
Yeah.
the streets, and
Yeah.
so it's kind of nice to hear that our council is aligning with the concerns of our citizens. So thank you so much for your service.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Have a good evening.
Thank you. All right, so at this point in time, we move on to the yes.
I just
Councilman
had a
Jensen.
quick question on that for Mr. City Manager. So at some point, if you could put some quick comments together about how you would like to hit these bullet points, that would be fantastic.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I will.
Excellent.
If you look, there was also some other documents that we put in regarding pulling out some additional information that have been pulled out, but we'll address that.
City Manager, you had some closing comments that you wanted to make about this.
Well, he covered a lot of what I was going to talk about already with regards to him talking about what the priorities are staff, we continue to dig into this and determine how we're going to deal with some of these issues that are mentioned as far as satisfaction, the areas that we need to improve in.
Okay. At this point in time, we move on to the announcements. If the city clerk would read the preliminary agenda.
The April 9th agenda includes one proclamation for National Volunteer Week. We have a presentation on the fourth quarter financial report, appointments to the Mechanical Examiners Appeal Board and Sustainability Advisory Board. We have a couple noise resolutions. Action items include a resolution for the Dynamic Core TIF District, setting a public hearing. We have an ordinance related to the electric assisted scooters, the resolution on the 2020 budget priorities, and then the deferred items for the City Hall renovation and the CIB resolution and the bond resolution that goes along with that. And then we have a discussion on filing and disposition of tort claims, a discussion on the Southwest 17th and Wanamaker CID, and then a discussion on the Housing Trust Fund ordinance.
City Manager.
I have nothing to add, Mayor.
I have a really quick remark that will make the council smile. I spent 2 days with Leah, Leah, thank you. And with Glenda Washington doing some supplier diversity training in Kansas City. And in those 2 days, you guys need to run into Leah and run into Glenda Washington and ask them how people in Kansas City were talking about Topeka. And just talking about how cool things are going, that they cannot believe the amount of activity that we had. We had a young lady that lives in Lawrence that works for Hallmark that was just raving about all the festivals that she had been seeing. So the efforts that all of us are doing for quality of life and the things that we're doing to contribute to our community are having an effect not only in our city, but in the cities that are surrounding us. Deputy Mayor.
I wanted to thank Chief Cochran and the officers that attended the Strengthening Police and Community Partnership meeting in District 2. And they've done District 1, District 2, District 3's next. And I was kind of disappointed on the how many people came, because the community asks for stuff like this, and then they don't show up sometimes. So, this is your chance. And but the people that were there were very engaged, and we talked a lot, and it was good. So come to a district meeting. I think you'd be surprised. Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz? Councilman Emerson?
Quickly, two things. As I'm sure we all get emails, and a lot of times they'll have like a subject line like Topeka streets or potholes, and, it's usually the same thing, a complaint about the shape they're in. But this week I got three different ones, and they actually complimented the street crews on the great job they've done. I think, what is it, 7,000, 14,000 potholes, or anyway, amazing job. And like I said, I was shocked to get 3 emails complimenting that. So congratulations, Dr. Peak, and your crews. The second thing is, speaking of streets, Southeast 29th, because of all the weather, is going to be delayed opening. It's going to be April 26th or 27th, but now it's going to be May 15th. So they're really pressing, Tom Flanagan's really pressing the contractor, and they've been working a lot. It's just been, the conditions have been bad for building a bridge footing in a channel. So thanks.
Councilman Padilla?
I'd like to take a moment to recognize our mayor and her sidekick, Professor Morse, over at Washburn University, who hosted last week Hermanita's program. I think that's the 10th year we've had it, and had 207 young ladies there who listened to a lot of professionals talking about their futures here in Topeka. And the mayor was able to garner an extremely high-profile keynote speaker. Mayor, if you could kind of speak to who you invited and what she did for that organization.
We had Congresswoman Sharice Davids speak to the girls, and it was just impactful the way that she connected with the girls. If you could imagine a room of 200 girls chosen by their counselors because they have potential, but they may not be the straight A student. And They are mostly minorities and, but they're not just minorities. It's like all of these kids that you know that are struggling, that need some extra support. And she makes all these kids get up and she says, I want you guys to hold yourself and say, I am lovable. And it was one of the most chilling moments in that conference. But we couldn't have done it without the Padillas and Mana de Topeka and all the support that we have from Mana de Topeka and Mana National.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And one other thing on the heels of that, tomorrow, myself and a lot of other people that I've been encouraging, and even Tony Emerson, Henderson, whatever, our pseudo-Hispanic, for the Hispanic Day on the Hill tomorrow. We'll try to recognize you as an also-ran. Anyway, I would encourage anybody who has time between 8 and noon to drop by and see what's going on there. There's got a lot of good information, a lot of good representation going on, and another thing that this city offers to its citizens that you can't get anywhere else because this is the capital city. Thank you.
Councilman Jensen.
I will share briefly that this weekend I followed my lovely bride to Wichita for her spring chiropractic convention, and while I was wheeling our wonderful son about the lobby of the hotel to get him to stay quiet, I just chatted with people that were there, and also a very positive opinion of Topeka from the folks in Wichita. So I mean, things are looking up from all sides of our state, I think.
Councilman Mays, Councilman Cohen, Councilman Lesser, Councilwoman Hiller. Seeing no other public announcements, we have one individual signed up for public comment. That is Mr. Henry McClure.
My name's Henry McClure. I live in Topeka, Kansas. Fourth generation Topekan, proud of it. As the original developer of College Hill, I'm very disappointed in what's going on there today. People are quite surprised when they find out that we actually had to sue Jerry Morgan to fix the sewer. The lawsuit was after we owned the real estate, made our deal with Jerry, and we had to sue Jerry Morgan to fix the sewer. Our private-public partnership wasn't much good because it was a code violation to have that Johnny on the job there. If the city would have enforced the code, it might have moved that lawsuit along quicker, and we could have got our project going on. Jerry Morgan, the Washburn Lane Parkway renovation, and the city all signed that development agreement. Today, inside that development agreement, there's a codicil that says, upon sale, you're going to assign that development agreement to the new owner. And on top of that, it says the city has the right to approve the new owner. And today, that deal is just swinging in the wind. So people that made investments because of the TIF district are now out in the cold. The city guaranteed those bonds. Well, today you're getting it. You're getting what you paid for because you're not living up to your end of the agreement. And all we heard all along was that my partners didn't do enough down there to make it right. And that shortfall in the bond is the problem. And the first time you guys got the chance to fix it, you don't do it. Would you have approved the new owner based on all the code violations that the current owner has? Go talk to your judge down in the code violation court. Find out how many code violations the guy that owns that. And to think that economic development is a bark park? Are you kidding me? You've given up. And it's time to go back to work in College Hill for people that care. I got to figure out how to get some attention and create some awareness and not give up on it. What we really need to do is we need to go back down there and create another overlay district. Now, I'm telling you, if we would have got the deal that the guy got at 29th and Fairlawn, where you can recapture 100% of your investment, I'll bet you I could have got my guys to do the deal without the city backing the bonds. It's not time to give up down there. For those of us that made the investment down in that area, we're now literally, think of the metaphors you can use about a bark park. But that's not right. And it's up to you guys to change it. It's a private-public partnership. And you guys got to live up to your end of the deal of the private-public partnership. I encourage you guys to look into it. Don't give up on the center. What's more important to us than Washburn College? Ask Jerry Farley if that's a good project. But don't give up. And let me tell you something. A guy told me once that having dogs in a restaurant was going to be a good thing. That's not a good deal. Just because they do it in Colorado. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McClure. There are no executive sessions and no further items to discuss on the agenda. Therefore, this meeting is adjourned.